The night my husband told me to stand behind a marble pillar so no one important would see me was the night I finally understood my marriage had already ended. His name was Thomas Carter, and in Indiana circles, that name still carried weight. He liked to say he was respected. What he really meant was feared just enough to be obeyed. For 22 years, I had learned how to stay useful without being visible. Useful wives did not interrupt, they did not ask questions, and they certainly did not attract attention. That afternoon, while I was folding laundry in the quiet house we shared, Thomas announced we were attending a charity gala downtown. He said it casually, the way one might mention picking up dry cleaning. He did not look up from his phone. I remember pausing with a folded blouse in my hands. In more than 2 decades of marriage, Thomas had never once wanted me beside him at public events like that. I stayed home. I sent polite thank you notes. I smiled in photographs taken at Christmas and disappeared again. "You need to come tonight," he said. "The new owner will be there. I need everything to look right." Everything except me, apparently. I asked what any wife in my position would ask. "Are you sure I have something appropriate to wear?" He finally looked at me then. His eyes traveled over me with the familiar assessment that always made me feel like a problem that needed managing. Find something simple, nothing flashy, and try not to embarrass me. Those words were not new. They had been stitched into our marriage years ago. Do not embarrass me. Do not say too much. Do not remind people where you came from. Do not exist too loudly. I found a navy blue dress at a consignment shop on the edge of town. It fit well. It was modest. It was clean. I stood in front of the mirror that night and tried to convince myself that I still recognized the woman staring back. At the gala, the room was everything Thomas admired. Crystal lights, white linen, laughter that sounded rehearsed, women in gowns that shimmered like armor, men who spoke in numbers and handshakes. The moment we arrived, Thomas leaned close and whispered, "Stay near the back. I will come get you later." Later never came. He positioned me near a decorative column beside the bar, just far enough from the crowd that I blended into the background. Then he left, straightening his jacket as if shaking me off with emotion. I stood there holding a glass of water I never drank, watching my husband become someone else across the room, louder, sharper, more confident, a man eager to impress people who barely noticed him. That was when the room shifted. The conversation softened, heads turned. A silence moved through the space like a held breath. I looked up just as a tall man entered the ballroom, calm, unrushed, powerful in a way that did not need proving. And before I could stop myself, before reason or fear could intervene, I knew. Because when his eyes found mine in the shadows, his expression changed. And the past, the one I had buried for decades, began to walk straight toward me. For a moment, I thought my mind was betraying me. The man walking into the ballroom moved with a calm authority that silenced everything around him. Conversations thinned, laughter faded, even the music seemed to retreat out of respect. People straightened their posture without realizing it. Glasses paused halfway to lips. This was not admiration. It was recognition. Thomas saw him at the same time everyone else did. I watched my husband's face sharpen with purpose as he adjusted his cufflinks and smoothed his jacket. This was the moment he had been waiting for all night. He pushed through the crowd with practiced confidence, arm already extending for a handshake that carried his hopes, his debts, and his carefully constructed image. I stayed where I was, in the shadows, where I had been placed. The man accepted Thomas's hand briefly, politely, without interest. His attention drifted almost immediately. His eyes moved across the room slowly, deliberately, as if he were searching for something he knew existed but had not yet found. Then his gaze landed on me. I felt it before I saw it, That unmistakable pull in the chest, the sharp intake of breath I had not felt in decades. His expression changed so quickly it almost frightened me. Color drained from his face. His jaw tightened, and for one suspended heartbeat, the powerful stranger disappeared. What remained was a man who recognized someone he never stopped looking for. He released Thomas's hand mid-sentence and stepped past him without a word. Thomas kept talking for several seconds before realizing he was speaking to empty air. Confusion flickered across his face, followed by irritation, then something darker as he traced the direction of the man's movement. Straight toward me. People parted instinctively as he crossed the ballroom. I could feel eyes turning, whispers forming. I should have moved, should have slipped away, but my feet would not respond. My hands trembled as I pressed them together, as if I could hold myself in place through sheer will. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, close enough to notice the way his breath hitched when he spoke. Evelyn. My name sounded different on his lips, softer, heavier, as if it carried the weight of every year between us. Lucas, I whispered, the sound barely making it past my throat. Behind us, the room was silent now, completely, unmistakably silent. He took my hands without asking, warm, steady, familiar in a way that made my knees weak. There was no hesitation in his touch, no uncertainty, only recognition. I have been looking for you for a very long time, he said quietly. His voice was controlled, but his eyes were not. They shone with something dangerously close to tears. Thomas reached us then, his face flushed, his smile rigid and false. Lucas Hale, Thomas began, forcing a laugh. I think you must be confused. This is my wife. Lucas did not look at him. I never stopped loving you, Lucas said. The words were not loud, but they carried, they landed, they echoed. A glass shattered somewhere behind me. I felt Thomas's hand clamp onto my arm. Too tight, too sudden. His grip burned, but I did not cry out. I could not. I was staring at a man from my past who had just cracked open a life I had sealed shut. We should talk privately, Lucas said calmly. Thomas scoffed. There is nothing private to discuss. Lucas finally turned to him then, and in his eyes was something Thomas had never seen before. Finality. Then Lucas looked back at me and pressed a card into my palm. Please call me. We need to finish a conversation that never should have ended. As Thomas dragged me away, his fingers digging into my skin, I closed my hand around that card. Because for the first time in 22 years, someone had seen me and refused to let me disappear. That night, after Thomas finally released my arm and drove us home in furious silence, sleep never came. The house felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves were listening. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, while the past I had buried for more than 30 years pushed its way back into my chest. Lucas Hale had not been a stranger once. He had been my first real love. The kind that forms before fear teaches you how much the world can take from you. We met in a small college town in the Midwest when I was 21. I was studying education, surviving on scholarships and part-time jobs, believing determination could solve anything. Lucas was different from the men I knew. Thoughtful, observant, quietly confident without needing to prove it. He noticed me first in the campus library. I was surrounded by textbooks and empty coffee cups when he asked if I had eaten. When I said I could not afford to waste money on late dinners, he smiled and said he had not asked if I could afford it. He asked if I was hungry. That was Lucas. We became inseparable. We talked about books and teaching and building a life that made sense instead of one that impressed strangers. He proposed near the lake behind campus with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. His hands shook when he slid it onto my finger. I said yes without hesitation. What I did not understand then was that loving Lucas meant stepping into a world that did not want me. His family carried quiet power. Not flashy wealth, but influence that moved through boardrooms and back channels. When they learned about our engagement, I was summoned to an office downtown under the pretense of discussion. What I walked into was an ultimatum. They knew everything about me, my financial aid, my parents, my plans, and they knew exactly how to dismantle them. One phone call, they said, and my scholarship would vanish. Another, and Lucas would never find work in his chosen field. I tried to be brave. I told myself love was stronger than threats. Then I found out I was pregnant. I was terrified and hopeful all at once. I planned to tell Lucas. I believed we would face everything together. But fear works faster than hope. I broke off the engagement without explaining why. I gave back the ring. I told Lucas we were too different. I watched his face crumble while forcing myself not to reach for him. 3 weeks later, I lost the baby. I grieved alone. For the child. For the future. For the life that had been ripped away before it had a chance to exist. Lucas tried to find me after that. I knew he did. I felt it in the unanswered calls, the notes left with friends, the sudden appearances in places I used to go. I disappeared because I believed it was the only way to protect us both. 6 months later, Thomas Carter asked me to marry him. He offered stability, safety, a way to stop hurting. I told myself love could grow later. But love does not grow in silence. As I lay in bed that night, clutching the business card Lucas had pressed into my hand at the gala, I understood something I had refused to face for decades. I had not just lost Lucas. I had been erased from my own life. And now the man I thought I had buried with my youth was standing at the door of my present, asking me to remember who I was before fear made my choices for me. When I married Thomas Carter, I told myself I was choosing peace. After loss and uncertainty, peace sounded like a gift. Thomas was steady, respected, and practical. He had a good job, a well-kept home, and a future that looked predictable from the outside. He did not ask about my past too deeply, and I did not volunteer details. We were two people quietly agreeing not to look too closely at what had already broken. In the beginning, Thomas was attentive in ways that felt comforting. He liked knowing where I was. He offered to handle the finances so I would not have to worry. He suggested which friends were worth keeping and which ones seemed like bad influences. At the time, I mistook control for care. It did not happen all at once. It never does. First came the comments, a suggestion that I dress more conservatively, a reminder that my background did not align with certain social circles, a warning that saying the wrong thing could hurt his career. Each remark landed softly, wrapped in reason and concern. Then came the isolation. Phone calls from old friends became inconvenient. Visits with my parents became shorter. Invitations stopped coming because Thomas had quietly declined them on my behalf. I did not notice how small my world was becoming until I could no longer see its edges. Money followed. Thomas insisted on managing everything. He gave me a monthly allowance and framed it as generosity. I told myself it was practical. Over time, asking for money felt like asking for permission to exist. I learned which purchases would annoy him and which ones earned approval. Independence dissolved into compliance. I stopped teaching after our second year of marriage. Thomas said it was temporary, that his career needed focus. The years passed. Temporary became permanent. My degrees gathered dust while I became efficient at hosting dinners and staying quiet in rooms where I did not belong. The house we lived in was beautiful and empty in all the ways that mattered. Marble floors, Neutral walls. Silence that stretched too long between conversations. Thomas spoke at me more than with me. Decisions were made without my input, then presented as conclusions I was expected to support. When I tried to push back, even gently, his tone changed. He never shouted. He did not need to. Disappointment was his weapon. The subtle withdrawal of warmth. The implication that I was ungrateful. That I was lucky. I learned how to disappear in plain sight. By the time 20 years had passed, I was no longer surprised when Thomas corrected me in public or positioned me away from important conversations. I told myself it was easier not to fight. That harmony mattered more than dignity. But something inside me never stopped listening. I followed Lucas's career from a distance, reading articles I pretended not to care about. Each success stung and soothed at the same time. Proof that the man I loved had survived. Proof that the life we could have had was real. I told myself it was nostalgia. But standing behind that pillar at the gala, watching Thomas laugh too loudly and boast too eagerly, I understood the truth. I had not chosen safety. I had chosen silence. And silence had cost me everything except the part of myself that was finally beginning to wake up. Thomas did not speak on the drive home from the gala. His hands stayed tight on the steering wheel, knuckles white, jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. The city lights blurred past the windows, while the silence inside the car grew heavier with every mile. I had lived with Thomas long enough to know this silence. It was not calm, it was calculation. The moment we stepped inside the house, he locked the door behind us. I turned to face him, my heart pounding, bracing myself for anger or accusations. Instead, he laughed, a short, humorless sound that made my skin crawl. "So," he said, loosening his tie slowly, "that is the man from your past." I said nothing. There was no point pretending. "You looked surprised," he continued, pouring himself a drink, "as if you had not expected him to recognize you. As if you had not spent years waiting for that exact moment." "I told you," I said quietly. "I did not know he would be there." Thomas smiled thinly. "Oh, I know you did not. That is the funny part." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. "You see, Evelyn," he said, turning to face me at last, "I have known about Lucas Hale for a very long time." The room seemed to tilt. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, I have known he was looking for you. For years. Private investigators. Quiet inquiries. People asking questions they thought no one would notice." Thomas took a slow sip of his drink, watching me over the rim of the glass. He was not subtle. He was persistent. My legs felt weak. "You knew he was searching for me?" "Of course I knew," Thomas said. "You think a man with his resources can move through the world without leaving traces. I knew exactly what he was doing." "Then why?" I whispered. "Did he never find me?" Thomas set his glass down carefully. "Because I made sure he did not." The words hit me harder than any slap ever could. "Every lead he followed went nowhere," Thomas continued calmly. "Every address was outdated. Every contact turned up nothing useful. People can be very cooperative when they are paid well enough." I stared at him, struggling to breathe. "You stopped him. You stopped him for decades." "I protected our marriage," he corrected. "I protected what we built." "What we built," I said, my voice shaking, "was a lie." Thomas's expression hardened. "Do not be dramatic. You were happy enough, comfortable, taken care of. Most women would be grateful." "Grateful," I repeated. "You stole my past." "I gave you a future," he snapped. "You came to me broken, pregnant by another man, desperate, and I gave you stability." "You gave me a cage," I said, "and you locked the door." For the first time that night, Thomas looked genuinely angry. "Do not rewrite history, Evelyn. You married me because you wanted safety. You wanted to forget him. I simply made sure you succeeded." Tears blurred my vision. "You let him believe I did not want to be found." "Yes," Thomas said simply, "because if he had found you, you would have left, and you know it." The truth of that landed like a verdict. I thought of Lucas sitting alone somewhere for years, wondering why the woman he loved had vanished so completely, wondering if he had imagined everything. "You did not just control me," I said slowly. "You tortured him." Thomas shrugged. Collateral damage. Something broke open inside me then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, irreversible shift. I realized that the man standing in front of me did not love me. He never had. He loved ownership, certainty, the satisfaction of winning a game no one else knew they were playing. And for the first time since I was 21 years old, I understood with terrifying clarity that staying with him was no longer about comfort or fear. It was about survival. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could not survive another year in a life that had been stolen piece by piece while I stood silently by. I did not sleep that night. Thomas retreated into his study after his confession, shutting the door with a finality that felt like a warning. I sat alone at the kitchen table until dawn, replaying every year of my marriage through a new lens. Moments I had dismissed as misunderstandings now revealed themselves as strategies, silences as control, kindness as leverage. By morning, my hands were steady. Thomas left early, already on the phone, already managing the damage. I waited until his car disappeared down the driveway before I picked up the card Lucas had given me. My fingers hovered over the number longer than I expected. Calling him meant crossing a line I could never uncross. I dialed anyway. He answered on the second ring, as if he had been waiting. "Evelyn?" he said softly. "Are you all right?" The question undid me more than Thomas's cruelty ever had. I told Lucas everything, not in pieces, not carefully. I told him about the confession, about the years of interference, about how my marriage had narrowed into something that barely resembled a life. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then he said, "I am so sorry, and I am not letting this happen to you again." We met later that afternoon at a quiet cafe outside the city. I chose a place Thomas would never think to look. Lucas arrived without an entourage, without display. Just a man who looked at me as if I mattered. He did not touch me. He did not promise romance. He did not speak of the past as something we had to reclaim. Instead, he spoke of choice. "I can offer you work," he said. "A real position, real income, independence. You would not owe me anything except your honesty." The word independence lodged in my chest. "Thomas will fight this," I said. "He will threaten. He will try to make me feel small." Lucas nodded. "I know men like him. That is why you will not do this alone. I will make sure you are protected. Legally, financially, completely." For the first time in years, someone was not asking me to be brave in silence. They were offering support without strings. When I returned home, Thomas was waiting. "Where were you?" he asked, already knowing the answer. I looked at him and felt nothing resembling fear. "I am leaving," I said, "not to be with someone else, to be myself." His face hardened. "You will regret this." "Maybe," I replied, "but I will regret staying more." He threatened to ruin me, to take everything, to make sure I had nothing left. I listened. Then I walked past him and began packing. I left that house with one suitcase and a clarity I had not felt in decades. As I closed the door behind me, I did not look back. Fear had ruled my life long enough. This time, I chose freedom. Thomas did not beg. Men like him never do. Instead, he retaliated. Within 48 hours of my leaving, my bank card stopped working. My access to our shared accounts vanished. Emails from his attorney arrived with language sharp enough to cut. He accused me of abandonment, of manipulation, of destroying a marriage he claimed to have protected. I read every word without shaking, because something had already shifted inside me. His threats no longer sounded like power. They sounded like desperation. Lucas kept his promise. His legal team moved quickly, quietly. They did not posture. They investigated. And what they uncovered went far beyond the cruelty Thomas had shown me at home. The numbers did not align. Funds moved through shell accounts. Investments appeared and disappeared without logic. Properties were purchased through intermediaries that led nowhere on paper. Patterns emerged where randomness was supposed to exist. Thomas Carter had not just controlled me. He had been hiding something. When federal investigators arrived at his office 2 weeks later, it was not dramatic. No shouting, no spectacle. Just men in plain suits and calm voices asking questions Thomas could not answer without contradicting himself. By the end of the day, his name was no longer whispered with respect in Indiana business circles. It was spoken carefully, cautiously, with distance. The charges came quietly but decisively. Financial fraud, misrepresentation, funds routed where they should not have gone. The life Thomas had built on intimidation and appearances began to collapse under the weight of facts he could not manipulate. I watched the news coverage alone in a small apartment Lucas had helped me find. It was modest, sunlit, mine. Seeing Thomas escorted out of his office did not bring satisfaction. There was no triumph, only relief, like realizing a storm had finally passed after years of bracing for impact. He tried to call me once. I did not answer. For the first time in decades, I owed him nothing. Not fear, not silence, not explanation. The divorce moved quickly after that. His leverage was gone. His threats were empty. The house, the accounts, the reputation he had guarded so fiercely were no longer weapons he could use. And I understood something with absolute clarity. Thomas had never been powerful. He had simply relied on my silence to appear that way. As his world narrowed into courtrooms and consequences, mine expanded in ways I had forgotten were possible. I chose what to eat, where to go, what to think, what to say. Freedom was not loud. It was quiet. And it felt like finally breathing after holding my breath for 22 years. The first morning I woke up without fear, I did not recognize the feeling right away. There was no knot in my stomach, no instinct to listen for footsteps in the hall, no quiet calculation about what mood the day might demand from me. Just light spilling through the window of my small apartment and the sound of traffic somewhere below, reminding me that life was moving forward whether I was ready or not. And for the first time, I was. I began working again within weeks, not as a favor, not as a courtesy title, a real job with real responsibility. Lucas had kept his distance, careful never to confuse support with control. He treated me like a professional, not a fragile woman in need of rescuing. That mattered more than he knew. I rebuilt my life slowly. New routines, new boundaries, new confidence in my own voice. I learned how to make decisions without asking permission, how to spend money without guilt, how to sit in a room and speak without apologizing for taking up space. Lucas and I did not rush anything. We talked about the past, about the years we lost, about who we had become. Love did not return like a dramatic wave. It settled in quietly, steady and patient, stronger for having survived time and truth. One evening, months later, We walked along a trail outside the city as the sun dipped low over the fields. Lucas stopped and turned to me, his expression open in a way that held no pressure. "Whatever you choose," he said, "I want it to be because you want it, not because you are afraid of being alone." I smiled then, because I finally understood the difference. I was no longer choosing safety over myself. I was choosing myself first. When I agreed to marry him a year later, it was not an escape. It was not a replacement. It was a decision made in daylight, with clarity and consent. The ceremony was small, no spectacle, no performance, just people who knew the cost of silence and the value of truth. When Lucas took my hands, I felt no fear of losing myself. Because I had already found her. I was not the woman hidden behind pillars anymore, not the wife positioned in shadows, not the girl who believed love required disappearance. I was a woman who had lived, lost, survived, and chosen again. And if there is one thing I know now, it is this. It is never too late to step into the light. It is never too late to choose freedom. And it is never too late to begin again. This story is not about a woman who left her husband for another man. It is about a woman who finally left fear behind. For decades, she believed silence was strength. She believed safety mattered more than truth. She believed disappearing was the price of being loved. But real love never asks you to shrink. Real security never demands your silence. And a life built on fear is not a life at all. Sometimes, the most dangerous prison has no locked doors. It is built slowly, with comfort, routine, and the lie that it is too late to start over. This story is proof that it never is. 1. Silence can look like peace, but it slowly erases you. Staying quiet to avoid conflict does not protect your life. It only delays the moment you realize you have been living someone else's version of it. 2. Control is not love, even when it wears the mask of protection. Anyone who limits your voice, your money, or your choices is not keeping you safe. They are keeping you small. 3. Fear makes decisions quickly. Freedom requires courage. Fear tells you to stay because it is familiar. Freedom asks you to risk discomfort for the chance to truly live. 4. The truth may be buried, but it never disappears. What is hidden has weight. Eventually, it surfaces and demands to be faced. 5. It is never too late to choose yourself. Not at 40, not at 50, not at 60. The moment you choose yourself is the moment your life truly begins. If this story stayed with you, tell me, what lesson did you take from it? And where are you watching from today? If you believe it is never too late to start over, like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear this, and leave a comment below. Your story matters too.